On that issue, and look, we're in this Congress, we're trying to cut budgets for the most part, but your mission is hugely important. And you and I have visited many times. Your ability to stop technology from going to China, but also outbound capital flows, is extremely important. So if you have resources to request, please provide that to this committee. I know you have OMB, but tell them that I have asked you to report to this committee on what the resources are that you need to do your job, because I believe it's one of the most important ones. When you look at the hypersonic weapon had American component parts in it, the spy balloon. We have to stop exporting this technology. And then when it comes to outbound capital flow, same thing. I mean, the old school of thinking was to sanction a company and hope that would work, or hope that Treasury would even sanction the company. And even if they did, they could change the name of the company overnight and the sanction has no force and effect. You and I talked about this sector-based approach, AI, quantum, hypersonics. Can you explain to this committee why that approach is superior to the old-fashioned approach of the OFAC Treasury sanctioning a company only to see it change its name overnight?
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate your support for our funding. As you know, I come from a place where we give you unfunded priority lists.
Well, I understand you, OMB is probably, yeah, I understand.
Sector-based approach, what we've done for advanced computing chips, the chips that are going to be the key to artificial intelligence, the key to the future of warfare, in fact, as well as the future of economic prosperity. In China, where I can't tell, because of civil-military fusion, how those chips are going to be applied, and we know that they are going to be applied to military applications, establishing a technological cut line and saying anything above this cut line should not be allowed in China because I can't tell its use case, is way more effective. It's more effective for industry because they can understand where that line is and they can then plan out what their business opportunities are. And it's more effective from my enforcement perspective. Sanctions, export controls, using the entity list is a whack-a-mole game where, to your point, people change and then we have to go after the next one, which we're happy to do, but it's way more strategic to go after it on a sector technological basis.
And as we are debating our outbound capital flow bill with the Financial Services Committee, I think that testimony is hugely important. Let me go to Huawei and SMIC. Your BIS approved hundreds of millions worth of licenses for Intel to sell technology to Huawei. Can you explain that?
Certainly. The Huawei and SMIC rules that are in place were actually put in place in the previous administration. However, when we put in these sector-wide controls that we were just talking about, SMIC is certainly subject to those controls, so they can't get the equipment that they would need to make the highest-end chips needed for GPUs, graphic processing units.
Can I ask you on that one? Because SMIC was able to use the tools and the machines and American equipment to make the 7 nanometer chip, which is the gateway to AI.
Yeah, we'll assume that it was SMIC. I can't talk about any investigations that may or may not be going, but we certainly share those concerns, and that's certainly the reporting. There's a process to do that. It is a low-yield process. It certainly would not be viable in any commercial company trying to sustain that process. And of course, they did access tools before we put in our tool controls, not the highest end tools, but the level just below that. Those tools will ossify over time, and that process will be degraded.
Did SMIC violate U.S. export control laws by producing the 7 nanometer? Chip?
It's potentially yes. We'll have to assess what the outcome of whatever
Yeah,
review.
I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I would say they did. Finally, my time's expiring, but Mr. Fernandez, and this may be more of a statement, I have no idea why this administration decided to stop permitting the exports of LNG to other countries. I mean, this gets back to our energy independence. Europe certainly wants our LNG. We should have had LNG terminals in Europe rather than Nord Stream 2 from Russia. That's an energy policy that really makes no sense to me. And then finally, I know this is out of your expertise, but the idea that we're not going to enforce sanctions on Iran and let them export $80 billion of energy to China to then use to fund terror operations is another foreign policy issue that, quite frankly, is troubling to me.
Thank you for your question. Look, on the LNG pause, this is a pause to assess the additional LNG export projects, whether they are in the public interest, given the increase in U.S. LNG exports and what we know about the effects of methane emissions and carbon dioxide emissions. The last assessment by DOE took place 5 years ago, in 2018. In 2018, our exports were one-third of LNG, were one-third of what we have today. Today, we export 12 billion cubic feet per day. We have a capacity of 14 cubic feet per day. We have right now projects coming on stream that will increase that capacity to 26 billion cubic feet per day by 2030. And those projects are not being affected by this pause.
But when you stop permitting, you're going to stop production of LNG in the United States. And LNG is a very clean energy as opposed to what China does. And so, again, this is not being energy independent. It's not helping Europe out from Russia. It's helping China. At the end, it's a bad foreign policy, and I think it's a bad energy policy. And we could debate this, but I'm way over my time, sir. And I know that Ann Wagner has some pretty, I know Mr. Perry certainly has some very tough questions for you. So I will now recognize the ranking member.